Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a holistic family consultant and I support queer, non-monogamous, and neurodivergent families to have relationships that feel connected, joyful, and sustainable. And you may have seen the last few weeks of videos where I've been talking about my Get What You Need workbook, which is a free download. The link is in the description. And some of you have given me the feedback that it would be really helpful to have an example. And I didn't want to just make up an example of a situation. So I actually invited my friend Kel to do the workbook, and we're going to talk through what he realized and what he discovered by doing it. And that way you can kind of have an example of what it might look like to go through this. And we might get into some other common things that I've seen come up with some of you who've tried this. So I'm going to share my screen so that way you can see where we're at. And then if you have other questions, you can always feel free to comment or um, send me an email. So this is Get What You Need, a workbook for identifying and meeting your needs so you can move from surviving to thriving. And so the first section is identifying needs. And I'm curious, Kel, because I know that you had done the like draft version of this workbook, and that from that you had kind of narrowed down, like you originally had a bigger need and then realized that you actually needed to focus down on something smaller. And so I'm curious, like having done this now for the second time, if that was different.
It was definitely a lot easier to come up to answers. Starting with as big of a thing as I did, it was too difficult. Everything was too vague for me to actually have any kind of answer. And it almost seemed like I was like going in this weird cyclical thing. And I wasn't really getting anywhere, but um, breaking it down to like the one single piece definitely made it a lot easier to actually answer the questions.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's not it's a little bit more concrete. It's not just something that's super nebulous. So is there anything that you want to share about your answers from this section since you kind of went into doing the workbook this time already knowing what need you were going to focus on this time around? It's okay if there's not. You can also share if there's anything like that uh, came up when you were doing this the first time and you were trying to figure out needs and you did come up with something that was too big.
Oh, yeah, it was kind of like using something in therapy of where you sit with the feeling, like that overall feeling, and then you kind of break down the parts of it, like what built this. And then I just kind of picked the one that, well, actually, the one that I didn't realize was a problem. Um, it was kind of the one that sort of just, I was like, I mean, it's not really an issue. And it just kind of like blurted out of my mouth. And then I was like, oh, that's a problem. That's something I need. Gross. Okay. Um, so, uh,
And I
yeah, and
think that's
I figured if it was a subtle enough need that my subconscious was just like, "Hi, I'm gonna blurt it out right now," that it's like, "Cool, let's delve into that."
yeah, and I think that that's a really common experience when people start trying to get in touch with their needs that if a lot of needs have not been met for a long time, we might be aware of some of them, the ones that are like the flashing lights, but that doesn't mean those are necessarily the only needs we have. It's just that some of them we've learned how to like push far enough back to not even really like notice that it's there or believe that it's a need. So like the list that's on this page is it's not all of the needs that humans have. it's some of the most common ones that I see not getting met. But it's also, these are all needs. Like we all need every single one of these. So it's really a question of like what on that list is not getting met, and like maybe you already know, or maybe like you experienced, you see it and you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that being a need.
I mean, I guess for anyone watching, like, for example, my first one that I went with was actually healing. Like, I've got a ton of past trauma, and the first thing that I went for was healing. And, like, some of the things that go into it is like a stability standpoint and belonging and getting appropriate support and having trust in other human beings and actually being able to connect with other human beings. And then the one that I didn't actually notice was particularly a lot of my trauma is sexual. So one of the things that I didn't actually notice that it ended up stemming from is my ability to let myself be touched sexually. And I didn't actually realize that that was a problem and a need until kind of digging into it. So, since healing was such that big, vague thing, and there are all these little things that go into it, it that's why it was hard. Um, and that's kind of how I ended up landing where I did. Um, just for background for anyone watching.
Yeah, and that's helpful as an example as we go through the rest of this to know that we're talking about touch as a need, which, like I said, is a need that every person has. And, you know, some people may be getting plenty of the right kind of touch for them, and some people may not be. Um, and with good reason. And I think it's also really important for people to hear that. Like, it's not like there's something wrong with you, or like you have made a choice to not get your need for touch met. Like, it makes sense. It makes sense with a sexual trauma history that touch would be a thing that feels scary and potentially dangerous to try to get met, even though it's still a need that you have. And that's true for a lot of people, that whatever needs are not getting met is for good reason. It's for good, either, you know, there are things that are challenging about the need, or there are things that are challenging about their life that make it hard to get the need met. And that's part of the goal here, is to validate that those things are true and that the need still exists. And how do we bring that compassion and find a way forward? And so to that end, we talked a little bit about the beliefs before we started recording, but do you want to share some of the things that you noticed about your beliefs about touch?
Um, yeah, I mean, as far as like every like who has this need, like humans like biologically are social creatures, so like yes, and there are some people I guess though that don't necessarily. And I don't just mean like just sexually, but as far as like me allowed to um I mean, what I ended up writing down is like kind of like sure, but like why should I need it? Like why is this something that I should need? And it kind of makes me feel dirty that it's something that I even want like at all. And then I kind of ended up delving into this like weird, I wouldn't call it an existential crisis, but almost a like, okay, but what is the difference in feel between need and want? And then it's like, oh, okay, it's when I'm having sex and I am doing things like to my other partners, it's this like weird, like in the core aching thing. versus like just kind of like, oh, it would be really cool with. But anyway, um, and just the thought of like, why can't I just be satisfied with what I have? Which I mean, I guess kind of does end up going into a little bit of the shame thing. Um, but it makes me feel like I'm needy or selfish and creepy. Um, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm too broken to handle it. Maybe I just, like, maybe I don't deserve it. Like, maybe this is punishment for something. Um, like, maybe not punishment. Punishment's the wrong word. This is not what I wrote down at all.
Yeah, I mean, I hear there, one of the things I hear is that those beliefs are trying to keep you safe and that touch has sometimes not been safe. And so, having a belief that you don't really need it, you might sometimes want it, but you don't really need it. And that makes sense as a belief that would keep you from being exposed to something that might be dangerous because you have experience of it being dangerous. The belief doesn't come out of the blue. You didn't wake up one day deciding to believe that you don't really need to be touched. You didn't wake up one day and, just feel, decide to believe that needing touch makes you needy or is not allowed. Those things come from a protective instinct, but they're not intentional. They're not conscious.
Yeah. Like, I have weirdness with touching strangers just in general, too. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's um, one of the things that might get into, when can this need get met and who can help meet this need. That for some people, going to like a, a community hug event and getting a big hug from a stranger might be a strategy to get more touch in their lives if they're not getting touch. And for you, that might be a completely unsafe feeling thing to do.
Yeah,
And,
that sounds horrifying and
yeah,
awful.
because different people are going to have different needs. And that's part of identifying this is not, if you identify a belief of like touch can't come from strangers, touch that meets your needs can't come from strangers. And that might be a belief that makes it harder to get your need for touch met, but it also might be a belief that's true for you at this stage in your life. And that's not to say that we need to dismantle every single belief that gets identified, but that could help guide what is going to be a helpful way for you to get your needs met and what's not going to be helpful.
Sorry, I'm going to make new notes while we're talking.
Yeah. And so for anybody else who's watching this, like this is also like this is what I do when people start this work and then are like, okay, and there's more here. Like this, then that's what I do in sessions is help work through, we can get a lot further and get a lot more done in a session if you've already done some of this on your own. And then we can, get into the layers that you might not see for yourself. So, you know, um, yeah. Were there other things on this beliefs that stood out to you that when you were making notes, or do you want to um, go into the next page and what you noticed about with about the beliefs?
Let me read over everything again. I think, yeah, one of the things that I noted down as far as a belief is like my need is less important than my partner's. Um, like what they need for touch is always more important than what I need for touch. Um, like if like really even sometimes when it comes to just like cuddles or something on occasion, like if they need cuddles and I well, no, because I'll still like occasionally be like, I'm sorry, I cannot do that right now. Um, but I have a problem asking for even simple things like cuddles, even with friends. Um,
I was gonna ask, and you kind of just answered it, but I think it might be helpful for you to hear a difference in because I hear it being easier for you to advocate for when you don't want touch than it is for you to advocate for when you do want touch.
yes.
And that also makes sense, given your history and the other things that you've identified about touch, and that this is a really hard need for you to get met. It makes sense that it's easier for you to advocate when it's too much and you want less touch than when you're not getting enough.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And some other things are mostly like more observations than beliefs, but yeah.
So we already started to talk a little bit about whether some of those beliefs are helpful or not, but are there other things that you noticed about when you were thinking about what beliefs are true, not true, or helpful?
Like a lot of them I can know logically that they're not true. Like, I know that I'm not too broken to handle touch. And I know that I'm not selfish or creepy for like wanting hugs or to cuddle. And I know that it's fine to need touch, but it doesn't feel that way. Um, And another thing that I ended up noticing is that it was a lot easier for me to pick out the ones that were false rather than picking out the ones that were true. Um,
So I think it's really important for other people who are watching this to also hear that about that, because it's really normal to be like, well, my brain knows that this is not true. And one way you can think about that is like, would a good friend tell me that I'm too broken to handle being touched? And that's a good way to evaluate. If you're like, I don't know, is it true? Is it not true? Would a good friend tell you that? Would a good friend tell you that that is true? Uh, and it's really normal for your brain to know, and that your body is not on the same page. That some part of you is like, but really, is it really not true? And that's the part where the healing needs to happen. And the goal here is to recognize it, to notice that it's not there's not an expectation that just because you see it, it magically changes. That's a path of a lot of work and a lot of intention. And the first part of that path is letting your brain say that it's not true, even if you don't totally believe it, but letting your brain be that, kind and loving friend saying that's not true. And the other piece about that, it's harder to identify the true ones. Part of that is because for most people, the beliefs that are causing the needs to not get met are the ones that are not true. So that's kind of the point. I'm trying to pull out the beliefs that are not true, because those are the ones that most of us need to do something about in order to be able to change the way we get our needs met. But sometimes there are things that are true, and even if they might not be true forever or for everyone, they're not true in like an absolute sense, but they might be true for you right now. Like getting a hug from a stranger would not feel safe. And
No, I would punch a bitch.
yeah, and that might be something like maybe 30 years from now, future Kel is fine with a stranger hug. Maybe not. Maybe some other person is fine with a stranger hug. So it's not an absolute that stranger hugs are bad, but it is a true belief for Kel today that stranger hugs are bad. And that's helpful information when we get to the creative problem solving part, that we know stranger hugs is not a solution for Kel today. So that's that's the goal with the beliefs being true and not true. And this also might be, like that it might be a belief that is both true and it objectively makes it harder for you to get your needs met. So it can be both true and unhelpful. And being true and unhelpful doesn't mean that it's a bad belief or that we need to get rid of it. It's just information. This is all information. It's all like, okay, yep, I can see how that's making my life harder. And just having that awareness is really helpful. It's really helpful to recognize like, oh, maybe it's actually hard because it's hard, not because I'm imagining that it's hard when it's actually easy.
I don't like that answer.
To be fair, if it actually was easy, you might not need a workbook.
Valid.
Yeah, so it might be interesting. I don't know what you already put for this, but to dig in a little bit to one of the beliefs that you identified that your brain knows is not true, but that you're not quite sure you believe is not true. For this last section.
Um, I kind of ended up putting in like, I guess like being worthy of it. Um, or I guess like deserving of it. Because I feel like that's probably one of the bigger ones that keeps me from asking for it. Like, why would I deserve to get this? So why should I ask for it? Um, so I figured that was probably a good one to tackle.
And what might happen if you stopped believing that, or if you started believing the opposite, if you started believing that you're worthy of touch and that you deserve touch.
Um, I don't know because there's so many other things behind it that like maybe it'll make it easier to ask or maybe it'll make it easier to work on the other things behind it or like it it could be a thing that is just a tiny puzzle piece that helps towards the bigger like let's get through all of the puzzle pieces that make me able to ask, which then will like get towards the like big goal, or maybe it'll make me able to ask, or at least start to communicate the need better. Because I know some people know, they just also know that I don't know how to ask. Um,
Could
yeah,
you
so
ask them if asking for the touch is too hard, could you ask some of those people if you're worthy of touch? Could you ask them if you
Goodness, no.
deserve touch? Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
But that
Why
I
not?
suppose that could be um because I
What happened?
absolutely I don't want to know their answer.
Okay. So there's a fear that they might say no, that they might validate the part of you that thinks you're not worthy and you don't deserve touch.
I am That's actually something I wrote down for, I think it's the next page, or no, that's the fears. Yeah. Um, being told that I am disgusting or unworthy, or that I'm only wanted for what I can do for that person, particularly if it's someone that I love or trust enough to actually like in be like, "Hi, would like cuddles, please." Um, I don't like the idea of opening being that level of vulnerable to someone. That scares me a lot, and I don't want to give anyone that level of power to break me again.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so if someone were to tell me that I'm not worthy, like that's a validation that will make what I know is untrue true.
Hmm.
And then I'm just stuck back into another cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense again with having a history where that has been maybe not said in those words, but definitely implied. Having that in your history, it makes sense that the part of you that thinks that that might be right is terrified to find out from someone you love that it is right, that you're not worthy and you don't deserve touch. It's a very protective instinct and it's doing a very good job of keeping you safe from what it thinks will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is for the sake of not making this too long, I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole, but this is a place where um, there could be a lot to explore there, and um, bringing it's really really important to bring the the kindness and compassion and welcome that part that is trying to protect you, because when our instinct is usually to push that part away, and say, well, that's not helpful. That's not what I'm trying to believe here. You're not helping me get what I need. Go away. uh, but that's what that part knows, is rejection, and giving it more rejection does not help change any of that pattern. So welcoming that part in and bringing the kindness and compassion for what it's trying to do and how it's trying to keep you safe, how it did keep you safe. And is there a possibility that with compassion and holding and seeing how scared and vulnerable that part is, that it could maybe take a break for a minute sometimes? And it might not be ready for that yet. Like I said, that's a bigger process. But that might be the direction that we would go with that, is to um, see if we could invite that part of you to take a little rest. And another piece of that is like what is building resilience, which kind of gets us into the skills part. But building what would you need to be, because that part's afraid that if you said to somebody, if you asked somebody, am I worthy of receiving touch? That part is very sure the person's going to say no. And so one of the questions that we can ask is what would need to exist around you or within you or in your life that you could ask somebody, am I worthy of getting touch? And if they say no, you would get through it. Not that it would,
And why would I ask them to begin with?
I mean, hopefully you're going to ask somebody who's going to say yes, but but the part that is very sure that they're going to say no. What's needed for that part to know that you'll be okay if they do say no? So that it doesn't, because that part is also very sure that if they say no, you won't be okay.
I mean, it's kind of the it doesn't matter if I'm not okay. Like, I've done it before, I can do it again. Like, it just means that I disassociate for a little while and then I'll be fine. Like, whatever. It'll hurt for a little bit. I'll, like, mentally stop existing for a moment. I'll get through it. I'm an adult. I've done it before. It'll be fine.
And
Healthy.
maybe maybe not exactly like that, but the piece that I hear you saying of it'll hurt for a while and then I'll be okay is that is so we can go into what you put for skills. But I see that as a strength, as one of the strengths that you already have is acknowledge that it'll hurt and that you can get through that because you've done it before.
Yep. Um, so as far as the skills go, I honestly could not just do a good or bad. Um, like I genuinely could not just break it down to one or the others. So I actually created like a moderate, like I wrote it down and I actually have like a moderate category as well because like there are some that I can do like to an extent. Like I'm not good at them, but I am not bad at them. Like it is something that I know of. I have done it before. I know enough of it to be able to do it. It's just not something that I do inherently. Um, I did notice that most of the ones in my good category are definitely trauma responses, so go me. Um, uh,
And that's another piece of like, yeah, it sucks how you got those skills, but also these are all skills that can be beneficial
they're
potentially.
useful for
Yeah.
sure.
And so if you got good at something under bad circumstances, that doesn't mean the skill itself is bad. So yeah, differentiating that the skills are all potentially helpful. They're
Yes.
just how we get good at them is sometimes painful.
Yeah. Um, the ones that I noticed for bad, at least, which is weirdly enough my shorter list, I just also recognize that the ones that are under bad are really bad. I am very bad at them. Asking for help, releasing control, vulnerability, and connection. I am very atrociously, like, negative points bad. um, And a lot of the other ones I'm either good at or moderate. Um,
So is there any in particular of the ones that you're good at that you think might be helpful in helping you get more touch? And it's okay if that didn't stick out to you, because sometimes this is one of the places where it's hard for people to see how it could be helpful. And it can be helpful to have a fresh pair of eyes.
yeah, I think probably it's having, because yeah, like my look at it, it's probably a couple. Um, I ended up taking out or like crossing out self protection, masking, um, because I figured neither of those were particularly going to be helpful with like actually trying to be vulnerable enough to ask for touch. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe
So it's not exactly one of the things that's written here, which, as it says, an incomplete list of skills. Uh, but the thing that we were talking about a minute ago with, um, which it could be self-talk, could be part of it, but the recognition that um, I have been hurt before and I can get through it and be okay in the end is a skill that can help to reassure the part that wants to avoid any possibility of you getting hurt. And that even if, again, if it's like your brain is doing this and you don't quite believe it, that's a piece that you can start using as self-talk of, hey self, I've been hurt before and it sucks, and I know that I can get through it and be okay.
I would just prefer to not.
Sure, and I would also prefer you not. I also think that we both think that if you ask someone who loves you whether you're worthy of touch, they will say yes. So I think our brains know that you are unlikely to get hurt in that particular way. Though
In
you
that
are,
case, sorry,
go ahead.
would situational awareness be very useful as well?
Yeah, if your situational awareness allows you to recognize this is a situation in which this person might hurt me, they are not the person to be vulnerable with. Or this, in this situation, this person, I'm pretty sure, is safe to be vulnerable with. That could be very helpful in helping you identify the right situations in which you can work toward getting that need met.
Yeah. Sometimes I think my situational awareness, well, no, it might be broken. My situational awareness might be broken, actually. I should probably take that out of the good category. No, I just realized that my situational awareness is also what tells me that like touch from anyone is not good. So,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of people that like cue off the like, nope, you are creeptastic, creepy bit creeperson over here. Like sometimes you can just tell. Like some
Yeah.
people just have that ick to them.
And
And you're like,
that
I don't even want to shake hands with you.
that sounds like situational awareness. The everybody is dangerous sounds more like self-protection.
Mm,
Sounds like overactive self-protection because it's trying, you're trying to protect yourself even from people that you are pretty sure are not creepy.
yeah. All right. Then situational awareness, I just need to not combine it with self protection.
Yeah, and again with it makes sense having experienced dangerous situations to feel protective as the like automatic first response. I'm curious about what you identified as something that would be very helpful if you improved it, because you've talked about asking for help at several points, but also in a way that makes it sound like that feels pretty far out of reach right now. And so I'm curious if there's anything else that you've identified that feels less far out of reach that might be helpful.
Um, I don't really know for sure on that one. Um, I was almost thinking like bits of releasing control, like not fully, but maybe just not making myself untouchable, not keeping myself in situations or in positions where people can't, or um, I don't know, just like jumping in and controlling things to stave off a connection where there is any level of vulnerability. So, like, really, they're all kind of connected. Like, the four things that I'm bad at are unfortunately very interconnected. Um, Actually,
So,
connection's probably the better start, because I think connection will lead to releasing control, which will lead to vulnerability, and then that can lead to asking for help.
and that could be a really helpful sort of roadmap to, you know, instead of being like, well, I have to ask for help, even though it feels impossible, somehow I have to ask for help, to recognize, okay, maybe I actually can allow a little bit of connection and then see where that goes. And that it doesn't have to, we don't have to be jumping to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of the idea of like if you're gonna hike up a 14er and you've never hiked a day in your life, you probably don't start with like the hardest 14er, right? You probably start with going for a walk in your neighborhood or like an easy hike. And
Nope.
and I mean,
Jump right in, Spartan race. Let's go.
well, in that case, why are you not asking for help?
Nope.
Okay. Um, what about it? Is there anything that you've identified as a step that you can take to work on practicing or getting help figuring out how to allow a little bit of connection as a first step?
Um, I have this really bad habit of being just open enough that people don't ask questions.
Hmm.
I open book myself enough that people think that I am actually an open book, that they are actually getting in, that they are, yeah. And it keeps everyone at arm's length because, yeah. And I think maybe if I stop doing that, or at least try to, and let people ask questions and actually let people get in, maybe that would help.
Yeah. And so I hear their uh, try to, and I want to honor that you're not going to do it the way you imagine every time, and that's okay. You can start with once,
I'm
and
here.
you are here. Um, and I hate to say it, but you're being very vulnerable, and I really appreciate it. Um, and there's actually one of the things that came to me here is that we were talking a few minutes ago about self-protection being sometimes overactive, but this is a place where, as you try to allow a little bit of connection, and you maybe allow people to ask questions that you can't predict what questions they're going to be, that balancing that with just enough self-protection to know if it's too much is um, that's the role self-protection is supposed to take, is not keeping everything out but knowing when it's like, ooh, actually I don't want to answer that question, that's too much.
That's part of the other problem that ends up coming in, though, is that there's this other part of me that is, if I have no secrets, no one can use it against me. So I don't really know where that ends up coming in either. um, so, like, if people ask, I will tell them. But the self protection wants them to not ask, I think,
Hmm.
is where it comes in. So I guess it's just let people ask. But then if I actually start to feel uncomfortable, oh, that's what that is. Okay. And it's
And
not keeping secrets, it's feeling comfort.
yeah,
Mm,
and there's also a piece there of releasing a little bit of control, because you can't control what someone will or won't ask, and building the trust that you will be able to know when you're okay with answering and when you're not okay with answering. And these skills are all interrelated. It's not, you it can be helpful to think about, I'm focusing on building my skills with connection, but it doesn't mean you're not also working on five other things at the same time, because they are all interrelated.
and I guess it's also trusting the other person to not push when you tell them that you're done.
Yeah. Or trusting
Gross.
yourself to be able to remove yourself if you need to.
Gross.
um, all right. So a lot of this, the creative problem solving, what seems possible will change as you work on those skills and beliefs. But for where you're at right now in this moment, I'm curious what things you had here.
Honestly, I kind of ended up coming into like, I can't really say decision paralysis, but it almost kind of was. I know we had talked before where I was like, I have no idea how things would feel or how things would be different because it's never been met before. It's never like I have no idea what it feels like or what it might feel like or like it's kind of like what does happiness feel like? What does contentment feel like? Like how do you describe that? Um how do you describe an empty hole in not you actually being filled? Um
Yeah, so I'm curious on a smaller scale then. Um, is there
Valid.
is there a time that you've experienced touch that felt safe or even felt good? I mean, even like a handshake or a hug or self-touch. Is
Yeah.
there an instance that you can think of and what that felt like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if I could just like I don't know, exist and not freak out when a random stranger touches my shoulder or my back or something, which they shouldn't be doing to begin with, but like not having a full freeze up or punch reaction would be kind of nice. Um, I think it would make me a lot less jumpy, which is probably really good for my anxiety and future potential cardiac arrest. Um, um,
Yeah, so
as
you
far
you might
as
feel less anxious, you might feel calmer, um,
and
more settled.
I think it would help the people around me feel less protective, like the ones that know that they don't have to potentially anticipate that I'm going to have or that I'm potentially going to have like a moment. Um,
Mhm.
which I've gotten a lot better about just in general. So, um, but like an it's almost like an overstimulation thing, which that one's never going to go away, but it gets worse because of this.
Mhm.
Large crowds where you're just people everywhere. Um, I think it would make it a lot easier for that, probably,
So your
which would
relationships
be
with other
really nice.
people would feel more relaxed, it sounds
I
like.
think so.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
also
I think so.
hear in there a piece of um, other people because they care about you trying to uh, help you avoid going into a shutdown or dissociating. And so they're taking care of you in a sense or trying to. And um, there might be more differentiation in relationships if that piece
Yeah.
wasn't there.
I
If
mean,
they feel they needed to take care of you in that way.
well, I mean, it's more that they like check up on me if I'm being weird all of a sudden. Um, but uh, yeah,
Yeah, I hear a lot of ease in your body and your relationships that might come from having your need for touch better met. Yeah. So we've kind of bopped around a little bit between the like feelings and we started here on this last question. Does this remind you of something on a smaller scale, which for anybody else who's doing this, that can be a helpful place to start. Like, have I ever experienced this even a little bit? What's that like if it the big imagining feels too big? Um, so to come back to that smaller scale, you said that there have been times when you have experienced touch that didn't feel threatening and unsafe. And so I'm curious if there are like specific instances, like was it a specific type of touch or a specific type of relationship or a specific type of communication that happened around the touch? Like, are there things that you have experienced that have made instances of touch feel good in the past?
Um, Weirdly enough, at the moment, I am having a very hard time like coming up with things. I mean, like there have been like past relationships where like there have been really good cuddles. Um, I rarely sleep well next to other people. Um, so that's not really a thing. Um, Hugs are nice, but not if they're too long. Um,
So in past relationships where cuddles have felt good, is there like what are the circumstances of the cuddles that have felt good? Has somebody else like initiated it? Has somebody else was there conversation about it? Like how did it go for it to feel good? And if that's not stuff you want to share, you don't have to.
uh, it no. What's funny about it is I'm basically only comfortable with cuddles if like I am Big Spoon, essentially. Um, so I am the one wrapped around the other person. I am the one in control. So of course that's the only time I'm really comfortable. Um,
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I know, releasing control has been one of the things that you've talked about may be helpful in the long run in getting more touch. But if having a lot of control over the touch is what allows it to happen, then it's that's where you are right now. And that's okay. It's okay to be looking for strategies to get touch that allow you to be in very close control of the touch.
that's fair. Um, yeah, so those are usually the times that I'm okay with touch. There was like one cuddle puddle with close friends that I really enjoyed. Um, but it was also like really awkward and it was all like shoulder to shoulder. So it wasn't like everyone like maybe not like shoulder to shoulder, but it wasn't like a weird suffocation of like
People on top of each other.
yeah, it wasn't like, a snake breeding pit kind of thing that sometimes happens when cuddle puddles occur. Where everyone's just like wrapped around each other like some kind of strange convoluted ball of where's there a human. That is suffocating and terrifying, even if I'm ridiculously close friends with everyone there.
So I heard you saying that it felt really good to have this cuddle puddle with close friends. And you said that it was awkward being shoulder to shoulder. And I'm curious if there's a story there about there being a correct way to do a cuddle puddle with friends.
I mean, okay, it was awkward at first until my brain connected that it was actually going to stay platonic the way
Hmm.
that it was intended. And I think that's where my brain gets hung up sometimes is that it occasionally translates any touch is sexual. And if it's not, which I recognize that I started it with, I need sexual touch. And now it's this like any touch is sexual. And it's this weird dichotomous bleh, thing. But it's not, if it's someone that I have not consented to having that type of relationship with, and they are touching me, my brain translates that to they want that from me, and therefore I am not safe. And that's why
Hmm.
touch is dangerous.
Hmm.
And even when it comes to close friends, my brain still does that. So once that cuddle puddle became legitimately safe, it was comfortable. Um,
Yeah. And you have experienced someone wanting something from you sexually that you did not want and you did not consent to. And so it makes sense that your brain is trying to evaluate for is that happening again?
yeah, yeah. So it would be really nice to be able to like actually just see people for being people and not immediately be terrified of a person just because they like touched my shoulder or something. It also just feels really vain. It feels so disgustingly vain. Um, it would be really, yeah, it would be really nice. And so unfortunately, as far as like the rest of the workbook goes, like I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah. And that is also um a really important piece is to recognize that it's hard or maybe not possible right now, but that doesn't mean that the need is wrong or goes away. And that there are pieces to build on towards the direction of getting your need met. Even if you're not all the way at like, check, the need is met now. Yeah. And so instead of thinking about like implementing a strategy for getting more touch, I'm wondering if the piece that would be helpful to try implementing was what you were talking about with trying to get more connection and building that sense of that it could be sometimes safe to and trust, building those muscles, if that is a piece that could be the test at this point.
All right. Run through the workbook again using connection. Got it.
And that could be helpful, and and I will definitely be interested to hear how that goes. But yeah, and also just to like, we're peeling the onion. And this is also a thing that's really common. It's like, oh, within that there's another piece, and within that there's another piece. And eventually we get far enough down to find a piece that's like, okay, I can take action on that piece. That's
Yeah.
something I can do something about. And then we gradually build back out from there.
Yeah.
Which and also that different needs are different. So um I want to acknowledge that too, of like some people will come at this with like a I need sleep like today, and it will be like a much more urgent, like this has to be dealt with now or I literally will not be able to function kind of need. And other people will come at this with this kind of need, which is like a, to exist as my fullest and most whole self, I need this, but I've been surviving without it for a long time, and I can survive a little while longer with not enough of it while I do the pieces that are necessary to get there. And both are valid. And it's hard to write a workbook that speaks to all of those things. So if you're doing this and you're like, some of these questions are more relevant than others, that's okay. That's because you are a different person than someone else. And, I'm trying to capture a lot of different experiences here. Um, so I really appreciate your vulnerability, Kel. And I know that you say that's a thing you're bad at, but here you are doing that and sharing your experience. And I hope that will be really helpful to people who watch this, who are trying to work through it. And if you get stuck and see pieces where you need to work through some things or you need some ideas, um, get in touch with me because that's what I do. And there are two pieces in terms of strategies for touch that I wanted to throw out. And if you're not ready for them, that's totally okay. But they just came to me as we were talking. One of them is have you experimented with any self touch? Obviously, you touch yourself in the course of existing in the world. This happens, but with like intentionally touching yourself and checking in with those senses of safety, and obviously touching yourself, you have lots of control. And does that meet any part of the need if you have tried that, or is, because that'll also help you tease out like, is this a need that really has to be met in relationship, or is this a need that is purely about my physical body being touched and I could meet some part of that myself.
I'm going to need that explained differently.
Okay. Um, so sometimes for some people, a need for touch is like the physical contact of like squeezing your own shoulder or like touching your own
Oh,
body
yeah, I've
can
done that.
okay. And has that felt like it's helpful towards this, or is this a kind of touch that is about it being in a relationship with another person?
It is other people. It's
Okay.
not a like compression comfort thing. It is a like external social biological thing.
Okay. Yeah, and that's helpful information as you are both looking at like what kinds of strategies can help with this, but also with what other needs are part of it that those pieces about connection and safety and trust um, are really important because this is a relational need. And then the other exercise is it's one that I do sometimes with clients, but it's also one that can be done with someone else. Um, and I know that you need to go, so we maybe do this another time if you're interested. But the exercise is about finding the edges of what feels safe. And again, it's all part of it is about giving you control. So instead of going right for like, we're touching Kel with all the hands, it can be like, Kel's gonna sit in a chair and I'm gonna start like down the hallway. And I do this like energetically over Zoom calls with clients, but you can also do it like in person with somebody. It could be like, I'm gonna start down the hallway or like outside your home. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna imagine like being in that proximity to you. And like, is your bubble that big of where it feels safe? And if that feels like, no, that's like far enough away that like I'm not registering any threat, it feels totally fine. You might move like slightly closer and see like when do we reach the point of like, okay, now it's touching my bubble. And do I need to back off from that? Or do I stay at the edge of the bubble? Where feels like a good place to be, where it's like the spidey sense is there, but it doesn't feel unsafe or too scary. It's not too much. And
Mm,
then, it there's space then to play with that. And does that then at some point feel like, okay, you could take a step forward, or actually please take a step back, or I'm done, that was enough. And
mm,
and starting to like slow down the coming in to touch and connection enough to see what feels safe to your
mm,
body. And that also might be different with different people. And this brings in some of the like play and curiosity because there's not a goal of we get to touching or to we get to cuddles or something like that. The goal is the exploration.
mm. Okay. Yeah. I'll think on that. I'll think about bubble and other people just in general too. Like while I'm out in the outside where people exist.
They do that.
Right. Well, I am going to skedaddle, but thanks for walking me through your workbook on what we've done, and I will go through some more stuff and let you know what I come up with and if there are any changes.
Thank you, Cal,
Thanks.
and
All
everyone
right.
else. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
and get in touch if you need help. Bye.
Bye.